So hello, everyone. I'm Jacquelyn Sundberg. Welcome to all of you who are joining us from wherever you are. We have a panel from tuning in today from a number of different places, and we'd love to hear where you are tuning in from. I'm here on the McGill's downtown campus and overlooking the green and in the library building today. So welcome. Today we are spotlighting some recipes from our cookbook collection and beyond, pulled together into a summer menu that spans decades and more than a few passing food trends. We'll hear from Julian Armstrong in conversation with Nathalie Cooke and Elis. And I'm looking forward to the discussion and also to some inspiration for some stunning summer picnics and maybe some historical recipes to try. Order of events for today, we have a menu of the day of sorts. For an appetizer, we have a collection intro with Librarian Elis. For our main course, of course, the panel discussion with Elis, Julian, and Nathalie Cooke. For dessert, we have a presentation from a special guest, Melissa McAfee from the University of Guelph. And a second dessert, which completes any good menu, a little video on cooking some of these recipes that I put together, followed by a Q&A. Before we go on, I do want to acknowledge that even though we're tuning in from all over, from home or from our cobbled together workplaces, we are tied to particular places. The downtown campus where I am is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, and this site has long served as a place for meeting and exchange amongst nations. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which McGill stands today. And as we go forward thinking about historical and seasonal menus, it's really interesting to think of the legacy of exchange of ideas that has taken place here for so many years and that we're continuing today. So I will now introduce the people you're going to be hearing from. As I said, the appetizer is going to be from Elis. She's the curator of our cookbook collection here in Rare Books and Special Collections at McGill. And she has a few other areas of responsibility, some very fun ones. I'm a little jealous. She's also the curator for the puppet collection here. Julian Armstrong has been reporting on food for newspapers for the better part of 5 decades, and she's covered everything from gastronomy and food prices to nutrition and food safety. She was food editor of the Montreal Star and then the Montreal Gazette, for whom she now writes a weekly column called the 6 O'Clock Solution, in which she reviews new cookbooks. But Julian, in her own words, is happiest writing about Quebec cuisine, where the latest developments in food and drink and centuries-old culinary traditions coexist in harmony in a province in which residents carry on an enduring love affair with food that is perhaps unique in the world. Nathalie Cooke is professor of English here at McGill and also the associate dean of ROAAr here in the library. She leads ROAAr with the aim of enabling moments of discovery through encounters with our extraordinary collections. Today, we hear from her as she wears her historical foodways hat and brings us all a taste of summer's past. Her publications focus on the shaping of culinary taste. She is the founding editor of the journal Cuisine, the editor of What's to Eat, Entrees into Food History, and the co-editor of the Female Emigrant's Guide, Cooking with a Canadian Classic. Her current project is a book on the history of menus. We also have joining us Melissa McAfee, Special Collections Librarian at the University of Guelph. Melissa has worked in Special Collections, Rare Books and Preservation departments in academic libraries for over 30 years. Along with a BA in Classics and an MLS, she has a certificate in bookbinding from the Roehampton Institute in London, England. She's Special Collections Librarian at the University of Guelph, overseeing, I'm doubling myself. She does many things, but today she's going to introduce us to an exciting new resource from the University of Guelph. So that'll be a little bit later on. For now, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Elis, who's going to give us an introduction to our cookbook collection here at McGill.
Thank you, Jacquelyn. Thanks, Jacquelyn, and thank you, everybody. What an amazing turnout. This is really great. I am happy to be sharing a table with you all today. So yes, it's my great privilege and pleasure to be providing the appetizer for today's meal in the form of a quick introduction to the cookbook and menu collections at ROAAr. So if you bear with me, I will do the thing we're all used to seeing now, which is somebody attempting to share their screen. Jacquelyn, could I please just get a thumbs up that you are seeing my presentation okay? Thank you very much, lovely. Okay, so hello everybody. As Jacquelyn said, my name is Elis and I'm the librarian responsible for the cookbook and the menu collections here at ROAAr. As a starter for our event today, I'm going to be taking us on a quick tour of these collections. I'll start just with a really brief overview, which is to say that combined, these collections house around 3,300 items. So we have around 3,000 cookbooks and around 300 menus. In terms of cookbooks, the majority of these are Canadian, American, and British. Most of them are from the 20th century, though there are a lot of 19th century and even some 18th and 17th century works. There are three types of cookbooks that are particularly well represented within the collection, and I'm going to introduce them each in turn. Like I say, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, so I'd be glad to answer any questions or tell you more during the event today or in the future. Please do keep in touch. So the first type of cookbook to introduce you to is the commercial cookbook. These are books produced by food and drink manufacturers, including companies that manufacture cookery equipment. So this includes the makers of blenders, toasters, pressure cookers, and there is a swath of microwave cookbooks, including Madame Benoit's 6-volume encyclopedia of microwave cookery from the 1980s, a truly spectacular work. There are also commercial cookbooks associated with specific brands of food, including Cheese Whiz, as you can see here, and 7-Up, as well as other ingredients, including baking sodas, gelatins, and flours. Flour manufacturers are especially well represented within the collection. And praise be to the online event. We have a crowd, as Jacquelyn says, from many different places today. And so I just want to explain that it's really quite neat to work with the flour cookbooks in particular, because in case you didn't know this, Montreal is dotted with grain silos, some of which are spectacularly iconic within the city landscape, including the flashing 5 roses sign, which is kind of like a homing beacon as you cross the Champlain Bridge back onto the island. So those are the commercial cookbooks. In addition to these, the second kind of cookbook that I want to introduce you to is the community cookbook. We have a great deal of community cookbooks, and these are books created by religious organizations, women's clubs, and other community groups. Some of the groups that are included within this heading include the Nova Scotia Ladies Curling Association, the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir, and a personal favorite of mine, the Greater Vancouver Mining Women's Association. So that's women in the Greater Vancouver area that are involved in mining, and a cookbook that they've put together. These books provide all kinds of insights, not least of all into recipes based around local ingredients, like the Black Whale Cookbook that I've included on the screen here, which has lots of really interesting recipes, including these recipes that involve seabirds that can be found nesting among the steep cliffs of the Gaspé Peninsula, where the book came from. And the third kind of book that the collection has a lot of examples of is the Domestic Management or Home Economics Guide. Included amongst these are quite a number of different editions of the Mrs. Beeton's cookery books, which I've included on the slide here, some of the most popular cooking books in Britain during the 19th century. Most of the earlier books in this category are intended for housekeepers, and it's really interesting to see how they evolve over time and how they become more targeted towards housewives and young women soon to become housewives. Again, these books provide all kinds of insights. It was really interesting working with students enrolled in the Gender Studies department, looking at these books and talking about what they revealed in terms of the role of women within society. It is also very useful to know that apparently the way to a man's heart is via cream cheese. Thank you to the Ingersoll Cream Cheese Company Limited of Ingersoll, Canada. Very useful information. So this has really been, like I say, a whistle-stop tour of the collection, and there's just so much more. The cookbooks are accompanied by the menu collection, which contains menus from restaurants, bars, and dining rooms found on board cruise ships, at private members clubs, and at other venues. There are also unpublished recipe books, and I'm very pleased to say the collected papers of Julian Armstrong, who I'm so excited to be spending time with today. Again, a truly spectacular collection. Most of the collection has been cataloged and is findable through our online catalogs. More than 200 of our cookbooks have been digitized and uploaded to Internet Archive, meaning you can view them, flip through them online, which is a number that's only going to grow. So do keep an eye out for new ones and be sure to let me know if there are any in particular that you would like to see online. I'm always happy to have a reason to spend time with this collection. As a rare books librarian, it's very rare that you want to see a book that has spatters and stains on it, but when you're talking about cookbooks, that's actually kind of the kind of degradation that you're hoping to see, because it really brings these books to life. So it's truly a fun collection to work with. And like I say, I'm always happy to talk about it, so please do keep in touch. But for now, that was my whistle stop tour, so let's move on to the next course, which is, I'll stop sharing. Okay, so I'm now going to be joined at the table with my esteemed colleagues, Nathalie and Julian. And we've been ruminating on kind of food questions and food trends and topics. And with their combined expertise and my general kind of curiosity, we have a few kind of things that we were thinking of talking about, but we're also quite keen to hear from you all as well. So please do feel free to chime in during the chat. One thing that we got to talking about was trends in eating habits. So I was thinking quite recently, I was thinking about things like avocado toast, the cult of avocado toast. Equally, the cult of pumpkin spice, which I feel is kind of dominated many aspects of social media for the last few years. But I was curious to learn from these two about kind of more historical food trends. So Nathalie or Julian, please, will you tell us a bit more about the history of food trends? Move us past the pumpkin spice.
Julian, why don't you go first? Because I think you're actually going to be talking about some recent trends that we saw during COVID.
I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to see all those wonderful titles from your collection. Some of them are old friends, some of those books. I just want to start by an experience I had in the Beauce. Everybody probably knows where the Beauce is. It's a huge maple region south of Quebec City. And I'd been there for a week or so having a great deal of maple syrup. And I lucked onto a very old lady. And they were the ones that could remember how their mothers used to cook. And they often had written versions in handwriting. And she said, I've got a really old cookbook from my family. So my mouth watered. And she led me down some steep cellar stairs to a not very finished basement and opened a creaky old trunk. And in it was a 5 Roses cookbook from, I think, around 1911. And all of it was very much encrusted with old grease marks. It was obviously well used. And I was aware, and I've learned this over and over, what an enormous role some of these companies played in the cuisine getting shared around the province. And they thought it was their own, but it actually probably came from some economist in a home economist in an attic. I don't know. Anyway, so start with this. Trends. Well, I think because of COVID, we are simplifying a great deal in our home cooking. In the first place, a lot of the fancy food shops were never open or were hard to get into, security measures and so on. So I think we did, in a way, less shopping for fancy food. We relied on our pantries. But one trend I have noticed is something that's come to be called sheet pan cooking. A sheet pan is, to me, a modern word for a cookie sheet with a rim. Someone could argue with me, I don't know where sheet pan originally came from, but there are whole books of sheet pan recipes. And as you probably know, you grease the pan or put parchment paper down, depending on whether you're going to get near a broiler. If you go near a broiler, you don't put the paper down. And you heat your oven to 425, that's the magic number, 220 centigrade. And you put all your food for your dinner on that pan. If it's chicken, it has to get rolled a little in oil, etc. The potatoes have to be cut up. And you go for it, and that's dinner. And I think this is a wonderful labor-saving method. Another one, of course, is a salad, main course salad. Salad used to be, to me, a tossed green salad. no more. That is also still salad. But I think a great many of us have been making main course salads out of whatever we have. You start with maybe the tossed green. In it, you put the leftover meat from the previous night's dinner, some nuts, some fruit, some mushrooms, sauteed mushrooms, etc. And that is dinner. And they are really delicious. They're very easy to turn out. And you can use up all your leftovers. Another trend I've noticed is the boom in buying your whole barbecued chicken at whatever place you shop. That chicken can be a wonderful series of meals. It can be warmed up and had originally, though it like was intended. It can be cold, it can be sliced, it can be made into chicken sandwiches. It's a marvelous invention. And you can feel as if it's real food. It's not something that was frozen 6 months ago and you have to blast with heat and then maybe it doesn't taste very good anyway. You can tell I'm not very keen on microwave meals. I think supermarket takeout in this last period has really expanded, and you can be kind of dazzled by a counter of supermarket offerings in these counters. My supermarket, my corner of Westmount, it looks like about a block long of supermarket things. And somebody said to me, how do you figure out what to buy? And I said, you ask the person next to you what they've just had and was it any good? And then you try it. But there is a huge variety there. And I think that is a much better buy than these delivery dinners, which come half cut up, half ready to cook. And there's a disadvantage to those dinners. They're quite expensive. And also there's an awful lot of packaging. So if you're interested in not polluting the world, you're undoing all these little packages of cut up stuff. And then where are you going to put them? Are you conscientious? Do you have a recycling system that's going to work? I mean, there is a question about those. I'm one of the few people that has never had one of those dinners for that reason. So I really shouldn't talk for any longer about it. Am I supposed to go through avocado toast, which is called the new pizza? I think other people have already touched on avocado toast.
Oh, I didn't realize it was the new pizza, though. That is a fun fact.
Isn't that a nice idea? I don't know whether it's true. The supermarkets, I think, are doing a very good job of selling avocados. I can't imagine the number of times that I have bought one of those little green bags of between 3 and 5 avocados. And then I've played a kind of a lottery game in my kitchen about when they're going to be ripe. And sometimes you wait too long, and sometimes they're still a little hard, but they are a real buy. I can't imagine California has grown that many avocado trees and how long it's going to last. But I hope other people have enjoyed them. Somebody suggested to me the other day that I make my avocados into guacamole, and I said, oh, no, I've got about 100 other things to do with an avocado rather than mash it up.
Julian, there's a wonderful tip too. If you go to ACFAN, you can get frozen avocados, and that's brilliant because
Are they good?
Yeah, they're excellent.
Really? I didn't know that. I'll go right over. I go to ACFAN for nuts. They must have the best nut counter in the West End of Montreal.
It's true. And there's a wonderful comment here from Cashman Car Prince, who's saying he saw a recipe for avocado toast in the 1920s, 30s issue of the Modern Priscilla.
Fascinating.
Oh, and I thought it was new.
Goes to show, nothing's new.
This is one other thing which might relate to the McGill collection. I've found when I'm completely exhausted, these people are all still coming for dinner because they haven't anywhere else to go, and we're obeying all the rules about distancing. I've been tending to look up in my old copies of Joy of Cooking, Fanny Farmer, the Canadian Cookbook, La Cuisine Raisonnée, and digging out something that I used to make or one of my mother's recipes. It's easy to get very lazy when you're turning out a family dinner 7 nights a week, and you didn't used to. You used to go out some of the time. Maybe some other people have some views about what their desperation moves have been.
Good question.
Maybe I can chime in. I think my job was to talk a little bit about historical trends. And so I'm meant to be coming up with things that you might not think of as trends. And my first one was actually pineapples. because Elis mentioned there was a pineapple wine in our Doncaster collection of manuscripts, which dates from the early 1800s.
1780 is older than I had realized.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, pineapples actually show up in England in about 1719 and in France in 1730. And they are incredible signals of luxury, right? So quite often they would be described as being put on the dinner table, but not consumed. And that way you could share it with somebody else, and somebody else's dinner table could have it until it actually became rotten, and it became this kind of symbol of luxury. And they were cultivated in something called, what were they called?
So they were more a centerpiece than a food?
Well, because they were just so exotic.
Yes, yes.
So they were cultivated in pineries. You had to be rich enough to have that kind of a greenhouse to be able to cultivate it. And so one of the shortcuts, and you can still see it when you go to Britain and France, quite often houses have sculptures, stone sculptures of pineapples in the front as a symbol of that kind of bounty and opulence. So that was one fashion trend of something that was cool. The other one that perhaps isn't so cool, but is closer to home, is eel, if you think about it. So Quebec's history is a sacred history. And so there were a lot of fish days where individuals and observant Catholics would have to eat fish. And one of the easiest, cheapest fish to get was an eel, because you could literally go and stand in the freshwater river, put your hands down and actually grab an eel as it swam through. There are these wonderful descriptions about how easy they were to catch. And you'll notice that the recipes for eel actually diminish as we get closer to modern day, because they're overfished. So the combination of overfishing and hydroelectric dams really puts paid to the ubiquity of eels. So it was a wonderful food for the masses that essentially went the way of the dodo in Quebec.
I want us to talk about seasonal food, but I was hoping, Nathalie, that you might say a few words about a certain ingredient that has come up in a lot of our conversations, which is not always the most appealing one. We do have one cookbook featuring bologna suspended in gelatin, and I was hoping that you might speak a little bit about gelatin. Again, the collection does have a lot of riches there, but it's such an interesting history. Please, will you tell us a bit about that?
I can hear that you're frowning on gelatin as not being a seasonal food. So
that's true. You're right. I shouldn't view it that way.
But if you look in the historical cookbooks, especially in that zenith, the heyday of colored gelatin of the 1960s, it really is. That's what you bring to a potluck dinner or a picnic. It's cheap, it's easy, it's colorful. It started with a recipe for something called perfection salad in 1904. By a woman whose last name is near and dear to my heart. Her name was Mrs. John Cooke. And she submitted a recipe for perfection salad to the Better Homes and Gardens competition. She only won third prize, poor woman. But perfection salad went on to be this, unbelievable fashion, right? For colorful, you could put bologna in it, but you could also put healthier fruit in it. And it certainly served as pride of place. And if you look in our cookbook collection, we have my favorite book is Dainty Desserts for Dainty People.
We've got dainty, but I don't know if we've got dainty people. Some iteration of the dainty vehicle. I'll check up on this during the.
We have lots of dainties, but there's one that was published in 1915, which was for dainty people. So if you feel that you qualify, go and look. You could look up the electronic resource, and actually one of the daintiest things in there, it's not exactly seasonal, but it's a little square of gelatin that's almost rubbery, it's so thick, with these incredible colors. And it's essentially a gelatin square that's rolled around in icing sugar, and that's the daintiest dessert. So it's rather like a petit four, but with
Oh, breaking news from Jacquelyn. We do indeed have that in our collection, and she's just put a link to it in the chat. That's awesome. And there's some wonderful comments about pineapples in the chat. I am learning a lot. A symbol of hospitality in New England. Yeah. I'm from New England, and I didn't realize that. I always wondered how it ended up on so many wallpapers, but I think that might be a separate question. But
No, it's not. It's the same question. It becomes this absolutely iconic symbol of bounty and welcome and graciousness. It's and if you couldn't have a real one, you could at least have an illustrated one.
Interesting.
In fact,
it's one of the convenience foods, don't you think? Once you buy it in little boxes, all cut up by somebody else.
Right.
Because it's really a grade A pain to cut up a pineapple.
Yeah. Can be quite fun if you're having a bad day, though. You get to really whack it sometimes, which is good. But yeah, they do make it easy for us, the supermarkets.
Speaking of which, at some point, when we get to Melissa and she does her presentation, take a peek at the wallpaper behind her. She's in a Starbucks, but is that some kind of fruit behind you, Melissa?
She's checking.
So wallpaper design and visual culture design is something that becomes really interesting. It affects menus in terms of, chinoiserie and Orientalism, but it also shows a fruit in some of the interesting illustrations there for notions of bounty. Michelle McLeod, who's helping us today, is an expert in this.
And so, Julian, I'm curious to hear from you. We were also talking quite a bit about seasonal eating, obviously as our kind of main theme for today. And so given your extensive research all around Quebec, we're so curious to know, what would a seasonal local-based menu look like here in Quebec, especially now that it's June and things are starting to shoot out of the ground?
Well, of course, it all depends on whether you have a fisherman in the family. I think that fish is a real treat at this time of year. Can you imagine a platter with a beautifully poached salmon with some freshly sliced cucumbers lying around it, maybe some stuffed eggs on the side? Oh, yum, for a lovely hot weather lunch. Let me think, what else? Well, Quebec is apparently famous for loving beef. We are one of we used to be the major beef consuming provinces in Quebec. And when I was covering the marketing of food for years, there was marvelous stories about the trains of whole beef animals in boxcars being shipped directly from Alberta to Montreal, no stopping. And actually it was so influential, all this beef was being ordered in Quebec, that the price for the whole country was never decided until the price of that boxcar beef was decided. So we are big beef eaters. And well, I live surrounded by people who know how to barbecue, and probably some of you know how to barbecue, but just today I finished reading a new cookbook about barbecuing vegetables. And you know that at the moment when you put the sliced tomatoes on the grill and you just turn your back and they fall through into the coals, this does not need to happen. You just need a little more knowledge about grilling vegetables. And I think there's a great deal of really good knowledge about putting good vegetables grilled next to a grilled steak. For instance, imagine a cob of corn, beautifully, perhaps doctored up with a little garlicky butter and then grilled to go with your steak. I think that's a very popular Quebec food. Am I giving a dinner or a lunch? It doesn't matter.
Good.
Well, I have a standard menu when I'm in the country and I ask friends over for lunch in the summer. They always know they're going to have. I've cruised by the best Montreal smoked meat shop in Montreal, which is down on Point St. Charles. And so they'll get Montreal smoked meat, several different kinds of mustard, some good pickles, some stuffed eggs, a decent salad, and their mouth waters for it. It's cold cuts, I think, have their moment in the summer. They're really easy on everybody. I'm always interested in the huge lineups to buy cold cuts in supermarkets, but they are popular.
Yeah,
about dessert, I've got a new idea about dessert that I've found and I'm using. Whatever fresh fruit is in season. Right now, the Quebec strawberries are just coming on, and hull them, put a little sugar on them, let them sit for a minute, and then serve them on good plain yogurt with a dose of maple syrup over top or maple sugar. It's a little easier to get maple sugar now than it used to be. And that's dessert. How much work is that? Nothing.
Amazing. No, that sounds delicious. Delicious. Any other historical summer treats to tell us about, Nathalie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually going to give credit here to my co-editor, Fiona Lucas, who's a historical cook. And so she was the one who took a look at some of the historical meals that we included in our book on Catherine Parr Trail. And I'll just give you a taste. So for breakfast in the summer, and this would probably be prepared on the back stoop or in a summer kitchen to keep things cool. Buckwheat pancakes with maple molasses, huckleberries and the last of the fresh picked raspberries, thick slices of cucumber, quickly stewed in fat gravy, slices of watermelon, and for a beverage, it would be a wild peppermint tea, which actually sounds like a great breakfast if you think about it. And it would be a bit later in the morning because the men would have gone out to do their work early in the morning when it was cool, and it would have been prepared.
Stewed cucumbers. Interesting.
And stewed in fat gravy. So it was very much almost cucumbers cooked, even though they were eaten as salad. There's a lot of mention of earlier on in the summer, dandelion leaves or, you know, the various things that you can grow in the garden, which would have been what we would consider a salad greens. Then the other one that caught my attention as a summer recipe was pigeon pot pie, baked in the bake kettle, stewed corn with meat, boiled green peas flavored with mint, drop sweet cakes flavored with the essence of lemon, fresh melon, early apples and pears, stewed huckleberries and red currants with a little maple or muscovado sugar, which would have been a real luxury, right? Accompaniments would be a bit of butter for the green peas, pickled cabbage, pickled beets, pickled peaches, to go to Julian's points for the pickles in the summertime. And as a beverage, and Jacquelyn is going to be showing us a version of this later, maple vinegar water flavored with nutmeg and lemon essence. So a kind of refreshing vinegar enhanced kind of a cordial or water. So, but the pigeon pot pie is not only seasonal, but it was also very timely because, as you probably know, the last of the passenger pigeons, the wild passenger pigeons, was shot in Canada in 1901. And the last of the domestic passenger pigeons, actually one called Martha, was killed in 1914. So when you ask people today about how tourtière is made, they will say it's pork. Whereas in the earlier days, you would have found passenger, pigeon meat in it included as well.
It's such a fascinating angle to cookbooks. I think it kind of relates to what Julian was saying as well about packaging, and I think you could relate it to climate change as well. It'd be so interesting to see, are the things that were kind of considered late summer, are they now maybe midsummer because of the way the seasons have changed? I would love to do some tracking of that within our collection. I think you could discover a lot there.
You know what you can do with trails? She actually recorded temperature and she had a diary. There were different periods of the year. So you can compare a little bit, which we loved. And the other one is, our ROAAr project, that we have a weather observatory data in our collections at McGill, which shows some of that information. So we can check it a bit, at least 100 years back.
Yes, citizen science in action. Now, I realize we don't have a lot of time left for our conversation, but I'm wondering if we wanted to very briefly talk a little bit about kind of the social nature of food. One thing that's been happening a lot in the last 18 months or however long we've been in this world is people showing off their sourdough on social media. And I'm sure that this kind of, urge to show off your culinary creations is not a new thing. So I'd be curious to know if there were kind of maybe more historical examples of people finding ways to show off their creations.
Well, when COVID first started, there were lots of stories that were out and around about how people were rushing out and buying flour and the makings of bread, and also toilet paper. Those were the two big sellers. People were panicked about running out of bread or toilet paper. I think that's calmed down. I don't think there's quite as much baking now. Maybe we've gotten used to the restrictions of our lives. And maybe we're hoping we're coming out of that. We hope so. I have several bakeries that I like to patronize, and if they're not open, my heart is nearly broken. I mean, bread is so important to us, good bread.
So true. And I guess that's probably why the comfort was there during those early few weeks and months when everything was so up in the air and we just didn't know what was happening. It's true. I'm remembering now all the emails. I think Jacquelyn was involved in the thread of where are you getting your flour from? And there was much information shared.
Yeah.
It's like a dream now.
I think actually Julian and I spend some time in the townships, and we are blessed with some very good bakeries here as well as in town. So as well as James McGuire's incredible skill as a baker, we have Owl's Bread out here in Mansonville. We have the Abercorn.
James McGuire taught Denis Marouche how to make bread, the guy at the Owl's Bread. So it's all a link. No, good bread is really worth traveling for. And it is, luckily, we're getting good bread in many more places. Could I just quickly insert something about the tomato?
Yes, please.
Because I heard a fascinating story. We are so keen on tomatoes, and when they're at their sweetest and best, that we tend to buy, well, some of us buy tomato plants. And I heard that Renault Depot last year sold out of tomato plants, and that they're moving fast today. So get out and get your tomato plants now. You know, the little tiny ones are not hard to grow. Sweet 100 is the kind I know best. And it will give you more little tomatoes than you can cope with in about late August. And you can put them on your balcony, your windowsill, your garden. If you have your back 40, maybe you have a big property. But I think that we were talking about summer menus. A sliced tomato salad when the tomatoes are at their finest. Could anything be better? Imagine that sweetness.
I'm going to add a bit of a sour note here.
Oh dear.
In terms of showing off your cooking prowess. I've actually just done a paper on a number of individuals who withhold information on their recipes.
Oh.
And so there's some examples. There's a lovely novel by Maud Montgomery where there's a recipe for pound cake that is never shared. And if you go and you look on the internet, you'll see a number of readers trying to actually recreate it. There are a number of recipes for mystery cake, which is actually tomato soup cake. But even Campbell's realized that in the early days, if they actually said that it was tomato soup was the prime ingredient, in a sweet dish, it might not go over well. And yeah, Melissa, I'll send you the reference in a sec. And I have to confess, my mother was a horrible cook, even though her last name was Cooke. She only had 2 recipes that she would share at local fairs. And if she was asked to give the recipe, she would always oblige and she would always leave out an ingredient.
Oh.
And I realized that it was always a different ingredient. So had her friends got together and had a conversation, if they'd ever bothered to do it, they would have been able to piece it together. And I still can't. I look at the cookbooks and there are variations of this particular recipe, which shows up in a number of different places, and I can't reproduce it.
Surely that's a reference really to one's pride in one's own cooking. You want to keep the thing you do so well for yourself. Would that not be part of it? Why you're being so miserly about telling the whole story?
Absolutely. I think it's so that you can be the one to bring that particular recipe to an event.
And the only one. Yeah.
And I think it is important that she wasn't a terribly good cook. And I think that was part of it, right? That there was a sense that you had to be able to produce something edible, attractive, or at least, so she had these couple of stalwart recipes. Mm-hmm. And it was just a way of essentially coping, I think, at a time when that was important.
Yeah.
That's just wonderful. So I'm just looking at the clock and realizing that it is now time for we had the appetizer, we had I guess we could have been maybe the fish dish, and now we can move on to the meat dish. Is that you, Melissa? Pick whatever course you feel most in affinity with. But I believe we're now going to get a demonstration from our colleague, Melissa McAfee, on a fantastic new website that she has helped develop. Melissa, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this. I'm going to share my screen, first of all, before I start to talk. Can everyone see the What Canada 8 site? Okay. I have to talk quickly, but I'm going to try to make this a little smaller. First of all, I just wanted to say that I'm not a cook. I actually learned a lot of cooking in the past 10 years. I've been at the University of Guelph since 2012. And God knows why they would want me to be the curator of the culinary collection. But I think I bring different skills to this. I'm a collector at heart. And I also really feel passionately about sharing our collections with the wider public. And that's one thing that I noticed when I first started at Guelph, was that people who would come to see our various collections were people who were sort of in the know, like Nathalie, but they weren't broadcast to a broader public. And so that's where the idea of the What Canada Ate site came to me. It was also looking at the What America Ate site, which Michigan State University did. And when I thought about the idea, I actually contacted them and said, would you have a problem with us sort of stealing this? And they absolutely loved that we were doing this. So one thing I wanted to say right off the bat is that the site is dedicated to Anita Stewart, who sadly passed away in the fall. And Anita was such a great mentor to me. I mean, I came to the University of Guelph with no background in food, no background in historic cookbooks. And she introduced me to a lot of things that, you really needed to know, like drivers, bibliography. My boyfriend actually bought me a copy of it, which is by my bedside. I did not know it was available online in the beginning, but that has really driven, our collections. The other thing I wanted to say is that Canadian cookbooks are just a small part of what we do. Our cookbook collection is about 20,000 cookbooks. It contains manuscript cookbooks, which Nathalie has worked with. We're doing a lot with ephemera, menus. The cookbook collection dates back to, I think, the 17th century. The earliest dated cookbook is in the 1630s. But what we decided to do was to focus this site just on Canadian cookbooks, because we think this is a really, really important thing to promote. And the students in several classes, including a food history class, which is done every year in history, are super interested in this as a window into history sort of thing. So I'm just going to do a really, really quick overview of this. There are two parts to the site. Sort of the meat and potatoes, as it were, are the items, and that's the repository. So if you click on this, there are nearly 300 cookbooks that we have completely digitized. There are a couple that just have sort of a digital summary because they are definitely in copyright. We didn't want to get in trouble there, but for the most part, you can get an entire cookbook. You can download a PDF. And you can search these. And what we decided to do was make these available for people who just wanted to browse in different ways. So Elis, like your conversation about the different types of cookbooks in your collection, we put these into different sort of broad categories. So you can look and see all the advertising cookbooks, all the commercial cookbooks, the community cookbooks, which are one of my favorite genres. And with the community, we're really, really trying to collect every single province. So they're strong in Ontario and Quebec, but we're going for the Western ones. We actually got a large collection from British Columbia a couple of years ago, which really upped the number of cookbooks from that province. We have domestic manuals and government publications. So these are sort of broad genres. Another way to search the collection is to browse it. And so what these are tags that we applied to each cookbook. So you could search by decade. You can search by collection. So these are by donors.
Where's Una Abramson? Yeah.
Yes,
I just noticed her.
Yeah, she definitely had, that was basically the beginning of our cookbook collection, was Una's about 3,000 cookbooks. But there are lots of Canadian cookbooks in her collection as well. Nori Gillett's, there are two areas that we're really, really interested in pursuing more, and that is Jewish cookery and Indigenous. So we made a big point over the past year of trying to collect every single Indigenous cookbook that we could find. The Jewish definitely, that was helped by the Noreen Gillett's collection, and that was used in an exhibit. And just showing you, we have this by different diets. The food brands are advertising cookbooks. What else do we have in here? Ingredients, organizations, and region. So I was recently interviewed by a radio station in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And the reason why they were interested in this site was that we have 7 cookbooks that are from Saskatchewan. So if you're interested in looking at cookbooks by region, you can do that too. This is one of my favorites. It's all-in-one dishes. And I'm just opening this up just to show you what you get when you look at a record. So we have all this metadata, the author, the publisher, the date. We use Driver to date things that are difficult to date because cookbooks, oftentimes the older ones do not have dates, or even places of publication, they're harder to identify. And then at the bottom, what you'll see is a PDF of the entire thing, and then a JPEG of every single page. The reason why we have the JPEGs is that to do an exhibit in, this is the Omeka platform, you can't bring an image from outside of Omeka. It has to be in the repository. So that's why we include these JPEGs. And you'll also see other things. And the reason why there are these extraneous images is these were used in exhibits. So we just put them on the record for the cookbook. But for example, if you like this cookbook, All-in-One Dishes, you could just click on the PDF. Just have to move myself over a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. And you could either choose to read it on screen, or you could download it just by pressing this download button here and saving it to your computer. The other thing I wanted to show you really quickly, I know I don't have a lot of time, is, where am I? Let's get back to this. You can also search just like you normally would in a library catalog. So you can search by title, author, you know. One thing I wanted to show you was one of the earliest cookbooks in here is Cook Not Mad. So just as an example. And you'll see, actually, you should actually see 2 versions of this. This is the one that is the first, let's see, publication in Canada of an English cookbook, a cookbook written in English. It was first published in the US. We do not have the Canadian version. That's very rare, as you probably know. But one thing I wanted to make about this, and for some reason, this is not coming up, but one of our students did sort of a spoof on this cookbook. So it's called Cook Not Mad, but it's a feminist cookbook that she did. That searching sometimes is sort of tricky. Then the last part I wanted to show you was the exhibit. So we've been working with Rebecca Bozart in history, and Kevin James, and their students do exhibits as a class project. And basically the way we do these is each student chooses a cookbook. We do sort of a speed dating session of all the cookbooks that we pre-select them. The students speed date the cookbooks. They select the cookbook they want to work on. And then we have basically in the different subsections, the what they will be writing on. So usually there's an introduction, there's meet the author, cooking up history, recipe cards, and we make these recipe cards in house. So they choose a recipe that they like and they talk about it. And then
So
something like,
Melissa, am I understanding right that this is contributions from students that build up
Yes.
this website and complement the
Exactly.
collection?
right,
That's great.
yes.
Well, thank you so much for the overview and the tour of this
Of
resource. I'm sure
course.
everyone in attendance will get a real kick out of exploring this collection. I know we did. We actually pulled a couple of the recipes for the menu that we threw together for today from your site. We
Fantastic.
yeah, it's been and thank you so much for the introduction. I'm cutting you off. I apologize. We are running short on time.
It is
So
okay.
I encourage everyone to go and check out the What Canada Ate collection. I have put the link in the chat, but we will send out a follow-up message with links to our collection resources, including the digitized Doncaster resources, the manuscript collection that Elis mentioned with pineapple wine in it, which we now have handwriting text recognition on, so we can newly search and get full transcripts of those manuscript cookbooks. It's really exciting new news from us. But I'm going to show one inspiration, one video to show you inspiration of how you might cook from our menu that we put together today. So a short 4-minute video, and then we'll open it up for questions. So brew your questions, put them in the chat, and we'll have answers for you after the video. So short video to show my experiments with historical cooking. Welcome. My name is Jacquelyn Sundberg, and I am a day-to-day cook. I feed myself, I feed my family, and I work with the special collections at ROAAr. Today, I took a scan over our Taste of Summer's Past menu and decided to make a couple that appeals to my love of berries. And so I chose to make the raspberry vinegar, and I'm gonna take a stab at making the strawberry Bavarian cream as well. And I chose the raspberry vinegar in part because, yes, I love raspberries, but the other thing is I am a very amateur historical cook. As I said, I'm a day-to-day cook. So I chose the raspberry vinegar because we sourced that recipe from this volume, Nathalie Cooke and Fiona Lucas's Catherine Parr Trails, The Female Emigrant's Guide, Cooking with a Canadian Classic, where there is the original recipe from Catherine Parr Trails' book, and then there is also a modernized recipe that I can consult. The raspberry vinegar is quite simple. Step 1 is you simply measure the appropriate amounts, and you put them in a bowl to soak, walk away for 24 hours. So simple instructions I can follow. Here we go. The other one I will try is the strawberry Bavarian cream. So I need to make a cup of strawberry juice and pulp. I need to make a cup and a half of heavy cream whipped, and I need to prepare my gelatin. So step 1, I'm going to do the whipped cream, set it aside, and I'm going to prepare my strawberry juice and locate my Jello mold. So have a look at the recipe here on screen. Et voila! Here we have our strawberry juice and our whipped cream, whipped thanks to the marvels of modern technology. A quarter cup of cold water, my tablespoon of gelatin, which these days comes in sachets. So we pour it in, and my 1930 instructions say to leave it for 5 minutes. We'll give it a bit of a stir. So it has been about 2.5 minutes, and the gelatin has become cloudy and thick. And I can't resist poking it. Now I have finished soaking my gelatin, and the rather confusing contraindication says now to loosen up your cold gelatin, you put the container into a bowl of hot water. The next step is to put this gelatin into your fruit mixture. So here I have my strawberry juice, and I have added the lemon juice, a tablespoon of lemon juice. And the next step is to strain my gelatin into the fruit. And voila! Maybe not as lovely as the Jello molds of 30s or 40s would have created, but there it is. We'll see how it tastes. I might garnish it with some extra whipped cream. So I have walked away for 24 hours or more, and then came back and I strained my mixture through a sieve lined with cheesecloth. And now all of the fruit is in here and the fluid is here. The next step is I'm going to add the same amount of sugar and boil it until the syrup is nicely textured and combined. And there it is. In our sterilized bottles, we have syrup that I'll likely dilute with sparkling water. And the finished dessert, I hope you try your hand at some of these historical recipes. They are up on our blog. The link is in the description. I'll unmute myself. There you have my experiment, and I can tell you the raspberry vinegar is a delightfully refreshing summer beverage. I can't vouch for the hot tomato juice with rose hips, as Julian pointed out. That's a lot of work for a summer menu.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work for a summer menu. So if you do have questions, once again, put it in the chat, and we will send out follow-up links, as I said, with all of the resources. We did have one question early on that we pulled, and I'll pass on to you now. Someone is looking for a specific cookbook that came out with a Pyrex tube for making bread. Does this ring any bells? Melissa, Julian, Natalie, I see you shaking heads. Elis?
Unless it was the easy rise method, was it? There was
I seem to remember that easy rise thing.
Yeah, that's right.
It was a whole trend. It was about 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Did it need special equipment? I can't remember.
It showed a picture of a Pyrex bread pan. So, I mean, that's why I'm thinking of it.
Yeah.
And I have a confession. If you go and look at the menu recipes, I'm sorry, I'm responding to another question that's coming up. Someone asked me how the strawberry cream tasted. And I think that I may have just not understood or not respected the original recipe because it's from 1935. And the indication on the recipe said to chill in your electric refrigerator. And I was like, I don't know, does this mean my freezer? Does this mean my icebox? And I put it in the freezer. So it may not have supposed to be quite as frozen as mine wound up being, but mine tasted like really delicious strawberry ice cream cake. That's kind of what mine tasted like. I don't know if it's supposed to be a purely like jelly, like a cold jelly.
Like
having looked at something like that, yeah.
Well, I think it might delicious.
It was. It's actually quite good. My husband was happy to share it. Yeah. So that one works out and it's not as much work. I can't vouch for the other ones on the menu. There is a question that came in asking about inscriptions in cookbooks that you've seen. Any fun inscriptions next to recipes in the collection? That one, Elis, maybe you can speak to. Natalie, Julian, if you've seen this along the way, if there's any marginalia that really stands out.
That's such a good question, and I wish I had some amazing examples to share with you. I can say that certainly that is some of the things that I live for in terms of when you find those within the book, it's really exciting. So I've certainly come across a few for my treasured daughter, for my beloved daughter, lots of inscriptions to daughters, as you might expect. And I've certainly seen a lot of scribbles. I think children may be being subjected to having to look at a cookbook against their will. I'm not sure what's going on there, but some kind of a graffitiing by the children. But I've seen a few kind of ad hoc notes made in the margins around kind of substitutions and things. And I will say that that's the kind of thing that I'm always looking for. So I will definitely make a note to try to compile all of those. I'd love to put together an exhibit that just featured that kind of thing and maybe some of the most tasteful splatters that we have within the book.
Splatters or possibly ratings, like tried it and a date, that sort of thing. That's what I do in my own cookbooks. And that's what this person has commented as well. I'm afraid we are out of time. It is 5 p.m. So I'm going to say an enormous thank you to Julian, to Natalie, Elis, Melissa. Thank you for guiding us through the menu today and giving us a perspective on historical menus. Thank you as well to the behind the scenes team. My colleagues Michelle McLeod and Labiba are helping out just to make sure things run smoothly. And also a thank you to the donors who make these kinds of public events possible. So we have two in particular, Doug Bagley and Ron Harvey, who support our events, and also the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Look out for a follow-up message from us with links to get you cooking from our collections and just exploring in general. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and keep the conversation going.
Happy summer.